This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Weight loss. It needs to be fast and sustainable. Noom GLP-1 starts at just $149 and ships to your door in 7 days. Take it from Clay, who lost 35 pounds on Noom.
It's a psychological thing, too. Noom is teaching me the habits so I do not have to be on weight loss meds forever.
$149 GLP-1s? Now that's Noom smart. Get started at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. Individual results may vary. Not all customers will medically qualify for prescription medications. Compounded medications are not reviewed by the FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be.
It took a lifetime to find the person you want to marry. Finding the perfect engagement ring is a lot easier. At BlueNile.com, you can find or design the ring you've always dreamed of with help from Blue Nile's jewelry experts who are on hand 24/7 to answer questions. And the ease and convenience of shopping online. For a limited time, get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com. That's $50 off with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and critic. Today I'm going to be talking to Amy Raphael. She is a writer, author, journalist. She's done loads of work, loads of jobs. She's a really amazing person. Some of her books include A Game of Two Halves, Famous Football Fans Meet Their Heroes, A Seat at the Table, Women on the Front Line of Music, the brilliantly titled Never Mind the Bollocks, Women Rewrite Rock. She's also written books on Danny Boyle, Mike Leigh. She's written a novel, Forest of Moon and Sword, and she's worked for a ton of magazines and newspapers: The Face, Elle, Enemy, Rolling Stone, Sight and Sound, The Radio Times, you name it, she's done it. She's really fascinating as a character in and of herself, but we're going to be talking about her, a revised edition of her book on Mike Leigh, who is also having a film retrospective at the BFI around about now. If you enjoy the podcast, please do me the biggest of favors and like, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell everybody. I really appreciate it. We are growing, but we can always grow faster, and that would be great. It would help me out. You know, I am a superficial person and numbers matter to me. If you want, you can follow me on Twitter, talking about superficiality, at Dr. Jonty, DRJONTY. But before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation.
I grew up in London. I mean, they were. I guess film and music were kind of always positioned side by side in my mind as my kind of first loves, I guess, with Kenny, a good dose of Kenny Dalglish on the side. So I grew up in the 70s, and my dad used to take me to completely illegally. I mean, the things you could do back then were absurd, but he used to take me to the ICA to see things like the Python films, when I really wouldn't have been. I would have been, I don't know, probably 10, under 10. and I mean, it's absurd. I mean, it must have been because I left London when I was 12, so it must have been when I was barely in double digits. And I remember kind of going to the ICA and just thinking, probably the only kid in the audience, to be honest, and just thinking it was the most incredible thing. So I kind of had that, and then I had I don't have any memory of this, so it's kind of a pointless thing to show off about. But my mum and dad took me to the first ever Glastonbury in 19.
Oh, wow.
Where I don't remember seeing anybody. And they also took me to see the Stones in Hyde Park, and I don't remember any of that either. But I think when you're kind of, the first gig I remember going to, well, the first gig I went to, it was first proper memory was seeing Bob Dylan at Earl's Court in when I was 12, I think, 79. So I kind of, they always, to me, they were, I mean, they're not the same thing. Of course, they're not the same thing, but in my head, they're kind of interchangeable as my kind of go-to places for making sense of the world and finding happiness or indulging in melancholia or whatever it is you want to do. I kind of feel like they're very similar things for me and for a lot of people, I think. So I guess, yes, when I first graduated and got my first job at the Face, I was writing a lot about music, but I was writing about film as well. And my first book was about music, I guess. So,
and I love the title of your first book as well. never mind the bollocks.
Well, I think the ridiculous thing about that was the full title was Never Mind the Bollocks, Women Rewrite Rock, and because bollocks aren't a word in the States, they had to change the title, and I was so pissed off.
Oh man, what did they change it to?
Girls with many R's in the middle and no vowels, and then the subhead was Viva Rock Divas, and I was just a bit like, oh, for God's sake, there's the American audience for you. But I mean, grateful that I was obviously to have my first book published in the States. It was, I think, Never Mind the Bollocks is such a brilliant title. So yeah, so that was where I started out, I guess, and I think it was probably music that made me want to be a journalist. This is really embarrassing. I don't think I've ever told anyone this before or shared this with anybody outside. But I remember going to see ABBA the movie when I was about 10, and the journalist in that got to meet ABBA, and I thought, if you get to meet ABBA, I'm going to be a journalist.
Have you ever?
What, met ABBA?
Yeah.
No, I don't want to. I think I don't want to meet them, and I don't want to meet Bob Dylan. I fear for no. I couldn't. I just couldn't. I wouldn't if I had the opportunity. I don't think. Too scary.
Really?
Yeah.
Never meet your heroes, sort of scary.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I've met loads of heroes, but I just think there's something kind of, I don't know about ABBA. I would have liked to have met them then and not now, not when they're kind of hologram versions of themselves or whatever they are these days. So I kind of, no, I think they kind of belong to my past. They don't belong to a kind of Meryl Streep version of my past. So much as I love Meryl, so I think, yeah. Anyway, that was my outing into music and film and books, I guess.
Yeah, I think what you say is really true, that it's quite common for a lot of people. You know, my idea of heaven as a teenager was probably having a rolled up copy of The Enemy stuffed in my pocket while I saunter into a cinema to see something before going to a gig in the evening, you know.
But do you remember, because when I left London at 12 and moved to Shropshire, my mum remarried and we moved to a small town, and I remember, do you remember how exciting it was knowing that you could go and get The Enemy? I think it was on a Wednesday, because I think it came out in London on a Tuesday, and we could go and get out, you know, in the provinces we could go and get it on a Wednesday, and the excitement of going to get an actual physical copy of what was probably the best publication in the world at that point was just, yeah. And you're right, that together with the kind of seductive darkness of a cinema, I mean, it didn't get much better than that, I don't think.
Absolutely. And occasionally you'd see someone with a melody maker or a sounds and you'd be like, well, what are you doing? What are you
Yeah, I mean, that's snobbery. I kind of, and I don't think people of a okay, well, let's say millennials is a kind of catch-all, but I think unless you're of a certain age, you don't understand how kind of tribal everything was in the 80s. It was, wasn't it? It was really, you know, you had your football team. You didn't deviate from that. You couldn't secretly admire another football team. You had The Enemy if you knew what you were doing. You had the directors you loved. You know, that was your thing. That was kind of, that kind of defined you. And I remember just feeling, having arguments with people about, you know, who I didn't think had any taste at all. and just, I mean, not arguments, discussions, but although I did go to, I went to a very forward-thinking school in London called Holland Park, which is a bit odd now, I hear, but was one of the most progressive schools in London in the 70s. And then we left London and I went to a small town that was very white, which was a shock going from Notting Hill to a white town. And there wasn't that kind of diversity of taste of what people of kind of music or film. It was just very, very narrow. So it was just Star Wars, or it was just Grease, or it was, Stevie Wonder maybe, but only for the music. I mean, it was very weird. So I remember just, the Enemy and The Face and all those publications were just a lifeline, I think.
I grew up in Barrow-in-Furness, and it was this very sort of it's a peninsula, so there's no way in or out, and it's a real hotbed of like creativity, loads of creative bands, loads of people. You never played covers. And just exactly what you said, that tribal idea of taste, where you could like The Cure or you could like the Smiths, but you couldn't like both. It was, you had to make certain choices. And years later, I'd meet people from the old town, and we'd talk about it, and we'd say, I liked The Cure and the Smiths.
I like The Cure and the Smiths, but I think when I went to Lancaster University, and I think I started there in 1985, and I definitely had, obviously this was before we knew about Morrissey, but I definitely had massive posters of the Smiths and a massive poster of Fat Bob on my walls. And I don't think anyone cared in Lancaster. Maybe that was I don't know. But yeah, it was, you couldn't like indie and jazz and blah, blah, blah. And I really, actually, I felt that a bit when I went to The Face. I felt like they thought I was this kind of weird kid going to Glastonbury. This was before Glastonbury was cool, and going to indie gigs every night and going to see odd films and so on. And then all that's changed now. I don't feel like there's really it's partly age, I think, but I don't feel like there's an underground in the same way that there was when we were growing up.
Yeah, when people start talking about Ghostbusters being a cult movie, and you're sort of thinking, how is that cult? I mean, I was in the cinema when it was on, and it was packed. It's not like
I know.
And so, in terms of film, what were those first films and filmmakers that you started sort of kind of nailing your colours to the mast?
I think, I mean, it would have been incredibly broad. I can't pretend I was particularly cool. I loved ABBA the movie. I was dubious about Star Wars, and I kind of, I went to see it, but I mean, many years later, Danny Boyle said that he doesn't do sci-fi with animals in it, and I kind of think that I agree with that. But I love those. I think most of all those Python films just stuck in my head as just being so kind of. It would have been around the time of punk emerging as well, 76, 77, I guess. And I just thought they were just so exciting and naughty and challenging and completely disrespectful. And I don't know how you understand that as a kid, but you kind of do, don't you? You kind of know that they're pushing the boundaries of things. So I think probably the Python films really stuck in my head as a kind of benchmark. And then I don't know. I mean, I remember very clearly seeing Nuts in May, watching that with my dad, and just thinking, this is really bizarre filmmaking, because it's again in a very childish way. So it's quite hard to recreate what I was listening to your Gabriel Byrne interview, and he was talking about memory, wasn't he, and how we remember things versus the reality of what happened. But my memory of watching Nuts in May was very much of understanding its humor, but just thinking, please God, never let me be in a marriage with a guy like him. I don't ever want to meet a Keith with his kind of pseudo-military voice and so I think it wasn't really directed so much. I mean, I wouldn't have been aware that was Mike Leigh because I was too young, and I think I would just see things like the Play for Today's, I guess, on telly, because we were limited to 3 channels. I'm so old that we were limited to 3 channels at that point. And I think the Play for Today's were massive for me as well, because they just felt like a kind of realism, I guess, that everybody who was into Star Wars and Grease and Saturday Night Fever, I was a bit too slightly young for, but it just felt like I really responded to that realism, I guess. I really liked that representation of life on screen. I can't stand the word authentic, but in an authentic way.
Yeah. That's so. I'm not sure. I think I was a bit. I think I misplaced for today, but I do remember Nuts in May play. I remember watching that because I remember thinking, "This is my uncle. I've got an uncle who." Just because
he's still alive.
No, unfortunately not. I mean, I loved him and he was lovely, but he was that guy that said, "Be sure and chew your food 27 times before you swallow it," and that sort of stuff was just like, oh, he's quoting Uncle Derek. But
I mean,
yeah.
I guess it was that kind of that thing of those plays for today as being just almost too close for comfort. You know, and just thinking, God, you know, have they met my family, as you say? How do these people know what's going on? And I think also, I remember watching. I have a memory of Ken Loach when I was young as well, and Kathy Come Home. So I suppose my dad, who died when I was 17 and is buried close to Karl Marx in Highgate Cemetery. I came from a very socialist mother and a kind of Marxist-ish dad. So I guess I would have been very aware of politics from a young age. And I remember leafleting for the Labour Party with my dad in the 70s. And I think walking out massive tower blocks and posting individual flyers through people's doors. So I guess I would have been looking for that to be somehow replicated in the stuff I was watching on screen, rather than pure escapism, maybe.
And it's interesting what Mike Leigh says in the book, that he's talking about, you know, whenever sort of politics is mentioned in terms of his films, he's like, well, every film I make is political because, you know, it's about people and people making decisions. So, you know, that's always political.
Yeah. And I mean, I think he would say that, you know, although he's a contemporary of Ken Loach, and although for some reason people always confuse them, I don't understand why, but anyway, they look very, very different and they make very different films. But I think Mike Leigh's films have always been political, and I think, you know, obviously more overtly political with a film like Peterloo. But, you know, that those kind of things he addresses of leak suburban embarrassment, whether to have kids or not, the decisions we make about relationships, you know, do we stay in bad relationships? Where do we find happiness in life? I mean, all of that in the widest sense of politics, because it's kind of, it's humanity, isn't it, I suppose. And I would think of him as a kind of humane director rather than a political director. But I mean, that's for him to talk about, I suppose, not me.
When did you sort of first float the idea of doing the book, and how did that come about?
Well, I just realized today that it's 20 years this month since I first talked to Mike Leigh. It makes me feel really old. But I was working at Esquire at the time, and I was editor at large, and I did a lot of Esquire interviews, which were a complete luxury because they were 4,000 words, and you could, yeah, can you imagine? And you could go off and spend, I don't know, you know, 3 days in Barcelona with Bobby Robson, for God's sake. I mean, things that would never, the kind of access you'd never get now. And I'd interviewed Tim Spall in October 2001, and we got on. I'd never met him before, but we got on really, really well. And that sounds ridiculous, but you sometimes just get on with people you interview. You know.
Oh, sure. Me and Gabriel Byrne are best friends now. We're best buds.
But he drew this handful of kind of bits of paper out of his pocket, and then kind of looked at them and then hid them very quickly. And I said, what on earth's that? Because, you know, he was very smartly dressed, and he had all these scraps of ideas in his pocket, a bit like, you know, when Bowie used to cut up all his lyrics. It would look like that. It looked like he'd nicked all of Bowie's lyrics. And I asked what it was, and he said, oh, he was doing a film with Mike Leigh, but he couldn't say what it was or what it was about or anything, and it ended up being All or Nothing. And then I had to speak to Mike a week after that, and which is the first time I'd ever talked to him, and asked him about Tim for the interview. And then I met Mike a year later in 2002, and we had a bit of an argument, like a bit of a horrible argument, because Esquire were doing an issue on what it meant to be British. He was doing publicity for All or Nothing, and he thought that I was coming to interview him about All or Nothing. And I turned up and said, right, so let's talk about the Britishness in your films, kind of knowing that he wouldn't like it because, knowing that he'd kind of say, well, they've all got universal themes and so on. And so we nearly didn't do the interview, but I stood up for myself. Kind of, we had it. I don't know that it was a row, but it was uncomfortable. And then I didn't really think anything of it. And then in 2005, he got in touch and said, did I want to do this book with him for Faber or Mike Leigh? And of course I had to think about it for like 1 second before saying yes, please. So that was the genesis of it. And it was daunting because it was the first book I'd done after Never Mind the Bollocks. And he's exacting. You have to be on your game. You couldn't turn up with a hangover. You couldn't turn up. You couldn't. And I mean, it's the same with all these people. I worked with David Hare on his autobiography, and you have to just be super present and switched on. And in a way, it's really good. It's a really good discipline because your mind can't wander off. You just have to be in the room, responding to what he's saying. And he quite often, and we did the interviews for the first book in his offices in Soho, which he's now given up because of the pandemic. But we did, it's where he auditioned everybody. So it felt like there were kind of ghosts of traumatized actors. But God knows what it'd be like to do an audition for him. I dread to think. But I just found him kind of, I don't know, just fascinating, I suppose. And he knew a lot about, he knows a lot. He goes to the cinema all the time. He goes to the theatre all the time. He reads. You can kind of, and if you're curious about the world, as I was and I am, you can kind of feed off that.
Right.
And you just learn. You end up learning so much. And yeah, it felt like a two-way conversation as well. It wasn't just me sitting there kind of, it was a conversation rather than me just asking questions and him answering. And, sometimes he'd say, that's a question with no answer. And I'd have to say, well, then it's a book with no content. And, it was a bit like that. It was a bit kind of, and then we'd just start laughing. And I think what people maybe don't realize with Mike is how close that humor is to the surface always. And you can see it in the films, even in the bleakest films, it's there. It's not just in Happy Go Lucky, it's there in All or Nothing, which All or Nothing I really love, actually. I think kind of underrated, but Happy Go Lucky is probably underrated as well. But I think, so that was the process of the first book. I think we met 9 times or something and had very, very long sessions, and I'd get the train back to Brighton where I live absolutely battered. And he's a good couple of decades older than me, and yet he could keep going and going and going, and I'd be there kind of thinking, Jesus, can I go now? Felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room, and still he'd be going, and articulate as he was 4 hours before, and I'd be kind of thinking, I'm just going to pass out here. So that ability that he has to just keep going is incredible.
I like the way you put that element of your relationship and the actual interview into the book, that you don't sort of edit out any of those exchanges when you're sort of saying, when he's saying that's not a question, or at one point you say to him, oh, you're pulling a face at that question, what's that? And he's like, I'm not pulling a face, carry on with your question.
Well, I think that's because it's honest. It's a kind of honest way of doing it. B, surprisingly, he didn't edit those bits out of the book, which I fully expected there to be kind of red lines just saying, take this out, but he didn't. And C, I think I remember my Peter Howarth, my editor at Esquire, saying that when we did the Esquire interviews, whoever was doing the Esquire interview, that the reader wanted to feel like they were in the pub with the person, or in having dinner in a cafe, wherever, somewhere intimate, where where you'd be having a pint or a coffee or whatever with Bobby Robson or Jarvis Cocker or whoever. And I think that always stuck with me as if you meet somebody who has been creatively successful, you want to let the reader into that experience as much as you possibly can. And journalism doesn't allow for that anymore, I don't think, which is a real shame. Sometimes, I mean, you get it in the New York Times. The New York Times have space to do that kind of thing. But you don't really get it in British journalism anymore. And I think it's a real shame, because I really want to know. You get it. Actually, Simon Hattenstone does that. He does that brilliantly for The Guardian, but very few other people are either allowed to or choose to do it. And I think I want to know that someone's pulling a face when they answer a question. Myself. Probably because I'm nosier than your average person, but I think, you know, it kind of brings it off the page a little bit. It kind of makes it a bit lively. So
yeah, you want someone to be eating a Twix or something, so that you can say, you know, as they bit into their Twix.
Yeah, or as, you know, when I interviewed Leonardo DiCaprio for 3 seconds once on the phone, and, you know, he was eating a bag of crisps as he talked, because he was really hungry, because he'd been doing back-to-back interviews, and I was a bit like, yeah, okay, you're Leo DiCaprio, but really eating a bag of crisps? And then I thought about it again, and I thought, actually, he was probably starving and had like no time at all. I just happened to get Leo eats crisps, and you want to read that in the piece, you know, you want to know that he's eating a bag of crisps. Sadly, I don't know what flavor it was, but anyway, I think detail is wonderful.
Well, you let yourself down as a journalist there.
I should spend the 3 seconds I had with him to ask, not about working with Baz Luhrmann, but what flavour crisps he was eating. It's School of Journalism.
So when Mike asked you to do the book, was that you were obviously already very engaged in his films. I mean, you just mentioned Nuts in May as a kid watching that, but were you sort of going to the cinema to watch his movies as they came out? Were you following his career very closely?
Yeah, I mean, kind of in an atheist religious way. Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, I remember going to see Secrets and Lies, for example, when it first came out, and being kind of floored by it. I think, absolutely, I would have done. I still do, but I think, you know, it's I don't know. There's certain directors, aren't there, who when they release a new film, you just want to know what it's like.
Yeah.
Even if their last few films haven't been brilliant, you still, and I'm not saying that about Mr. Turner or Peterloo, but I'm just saying generally, you know, whether it's, I also wrote a Danny Boyle book for, or 2 Danny Boyle books for Faber along the same lines as the Mike Leigh one, and you just want to know what these people are doing next. You know, like I'll always want to know what Lynn Ramsey's doing next, or Chloe Bernard, or, you know, there's maybe 12 directors who just, you know, everybody's got their kind of their dozen favorite directors who they always just want to know what the work's like, and it might not be a kind of communal experience like going to see Bond. It might just be something you do with 3 other people on a wet afternoon in the cinema. But, you know, it's just something that you will always do, that you can't kind of let those films slip by. So yeah, he would have been part of my, you know, he was definitely on my list of filmmakers whose work I would never have missed. But I still had to rewatch everything that winter. And
how was that?
Hard work. I mean, brilliant, but hard work, because I also had to write. I also decided that I was going to do a detailed synopsis of each film for the start of each chapter, just to remind people of what went on. And I could have done like a really short couple of paragraphs, but no, I had to do almost a scene by scene thing. So I created a complete rod for my own back, and I had to do that again with the update with Mr. Turner and Peterloo, which was incredibly complicated.
The Peterloo one seemed to be the longest of the book as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's longer than any chapter in the book. So I think, I don't know. I mean, it's difficult with these books, isn't it? Because you kind of Faber just allow. I don't know if they're commissioning anymore, actually, but sadly. But I think, and I think it would be really nice if they commissioned a couple of female journalists, because I think there's me and one other woman on the entire list, and there's about 25 books, and they're all by male journalists. Just, I'm sure, by chance, but it's a bit weird. But I think you're pretty much, you know, as long as you're doing film by, well, you don't even have to do film by film. I don't think you could choose do whatever format you want to do. And I don't really know. I think the way I've done it with Mike and the ones I did with Danny Boyle, they kind of work because you can dip in and out. So if naked is your thing, then, you know, you can just dip into that and ignore High Hopes or whatever, obviously. So I think, you know, I'm not expecting, especially this one. Have you had an actual physical copy?
No, I haven't got the physical copy. No, I read the PDF.
I mean, I know people can't see this on a podcast.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's quite a thick.
It is very sick. It's
you could kill a cat with that, definitely.
Don't tell my cat that, but yeah, you could kill my cat with that. So I think, you know, they are supposed to be definitive. That is the point of them. You know, you chat to collaborators, which is always brilliant. You know, so you talk to Eddie Marsan about the research he did for Happy Go Lucky. You know, he spent 6 months researching conspiracy theories. 6 months. And I think it is in fact, you know, as great as interesting as it is talking to Mike. I mean, talking to his collaborators is fascinating, and I think when they did, this is a Vera Drake spoiler, so turn off now if you haven't watched Vera Drake, which you really ought to, because it is as more poignant now than when it came out, actually.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But they did. I mean, this is just unbelievable that when they did that scene where the police come and arrest Vera Drake for performing illegal abortions in the 1950s in the UK. Nobody knew around that table knew that the police were coming. Not Imelda Staunton, not Phil Davis, not Danny Mays. Nobody knew the police were coming. I mean, it's just astonishing filmmaking, and you can see the surprise on their faces. And I think Phil Davis says in the book that they saw all these actors dressed as cops, and they just thought they were going off to do something else. He didn't think it had anything to do with his family.
Right.
Cool. And similarly, in that brilliant barbecue scene in Secrets and Lies, you know, that was a 10-hour improvisation. But talking to Tim Spall about that, you know, it's just really interesting. I think if you or you know, talking to the crew, you know, talking to Susie Davis about rebuilding the 1832 Royal Academy for Mr. Turner, you know, I mean, that is a labor of love. It's and I love Mr. Turner. I think it's a brilliant film. But that scene where Turner's up against Constable and they're, you know, basically being bitchy with each other, you know, you just feel like you were there. It just feels like, and that's really, really hard to do. And it's all, you know, it's all Mike's meticulous planning that allows that to happen. And the research that they do, whether it's, you know, 6 months on conspiracy theories or whatever it is, it just, you know, you might be watching and thinking many things, but you're not thinking, oh, nobody could be bothered to research their part properly. You know, it always feels kind of real.
I mean, that's a strange thing about Mike Leigh for me personally, and this is just my he isn't one of my 12 authors, my dozen directors, sorry, that I would necessarily be sort of running to the cinema to see what he's done next. And yet reading your book, I was going, oh yeah, Naked, that's good. Oh yeah, High Hope, that's good. Oh wow, Vera Drake, that's a masterpiece. Oh, Mr. Turner, I saw that in Cannes when it premiered, and I thought it was one of the best films of the festival. It was just amazing. And so I'm going through them, going, well, why isn't he one of those dozen filmmakers? Because he certainly made, you know, more than a handful of films that I would sort of rate as among the best in British cinema.
I mean, I think maybe I don't know what your dozen. I don't know why I decided on a dozen, but that kind of seems to make sense. But I think your dozen, whoever your dozen filmmakers are, I think if you're interested in film, his films kind of, I don't know, they kind of seep into your life somehow. Mm-hmm. You know, and Johnny and Naked is just part of an ongoing discussion about masculinity and how men define themselves and how men behave with women. Again, particularly a relevant discussion this week. And I think, you know, maybe you would choose to go and see a Ridley Scott film before you'd see a Mike Leigh film. I mean, not you, anybody, but I think at some point that Mike Leigh film would become part of your consciousness, because that's what his films seem to do. And it's extraordinary. I mean, you know, Miss Peterloo is a difficult film, and it's not a commercial film, but the fact that it resonated so closely with what was going on around the world in terms of all the riots in America and how all that played out under Trump's, in inverted commas, presidency. You know, how does he manage to do that? The comments he makes on our difficult times are kind of always prescient and he's not setting out to do that ever. I think he's utterly pleasing himself. He's not thinking, oh, abortion is going to become a big issue again in 10 years time. I mean, of course he's not thinking like that. He's far too selfish to be thinking like that. He's just thinking about what pleases him. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know why I'm trying to work out why you don't rush to the cinema to see his film.
But again, you're failing in your job as a journalist.
I think it's there's no kind of urgency, let's say, in the way that because he's not hyped up, obviously, in the way that June or all of those blockbuster films are, but also even the kind of must-see smaller indie films. He's a completely standalone director, is I suppose what I'm very very boringly coming around to, and therefore you can see his films whenever and they'll be relevant. I mean, you can watch Nuts in May now, and of course it's dated in terms of fashion and the film stock and so on, but it's it could be remade next week with pretty much similar dialogue, and it would be still as funny. That humor, our essentially quintessentially British humor, hasn't changed since I was 9, which is
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head to head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Decades ago. So I think there's a kind of there's a quality to his films that last, that have longevity that is quite unusual, probably.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would do a mea culpa in terms of, I think that it's not so much fault of Mike Leigh's films, certainly, and or anyone needing to convince me, but it's more, I think there's a certain attitude in Britain to our own filmmakers that after they reach a certain success, we want to sort of just put them in a dismissive, like, pigeonhole that we can, you know what I mean? That we can say, okay, Mike Leigh always does this and he always does that. And then you actually go read your book and you go through the list of movies and you go, well, actually, no, I mean, Another Year, that's a brilliant film. I loved that film, and so you've sort of tarred them all or you've tarred all the films with the same brush, and you should have, and you should actually look at the diversity rather than the similarities. Those are a bunch of really different films in there. It's not just a Mike Leigh film, even though there's obviously a sensibility behind all those films, and there's certainly a methodology.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think he makes every film in his same kind of quasi-mysterious way, and they work. That some are more commercial than others, but I think he doesn't have like Danny Boyle might talk about, or I pushed him on his kind of the fact that most Danny Boyle films kind of start have the first act is generally enthralling, the second act is pretty good, and the third acts then kind of drift away like he's lost interest. That is quite often. I don't know if do you agree? Am I?
Yeah, that's no, I mean,
as a gross,
yeah, it works with what was the science fiction film Sunshine.
Yeah,
Trainspotting definitely arrives with a bang and then sort of becomes a bit episodic towards the end. Yeah, no, I think that's fairly. Charles Dickens always used to do that as well. He used to
keep in good company, and I'm not, I've never made a film, so I imagine it's really hard to sustain that level of energy through 3 acts or however many acts you're creating in your work. But I think it's harder to put Mike Leigh films in that category of saying, well, they've all got this failing or that failing. And I know people have tried by saying that some of his characters are caricatures, and that's personal reaction response. That's fine, but I think they're harder to I think also in his later years he's become so ambitious that you kind of think a lot of directors would be, and I'm being ageist here, but a lot of directors might be thinking about winding down a little bit. But you've got people like Ridley Scott, Mike Leigh, Ken Loach, who are all wanting to make, really big, important, exciting films as they either head for their 80s or are in their 80s. And I think that's absolutely brilliant, because of course they've got more to say than they've ever had to say, because of the life, they've been alive for 7 or 8 decades. So, but it is still that idea. And I think the kind of saddest thing about this book, the Mike Leigh book, is at the end of the Peterloo chapter, he talks, and the book, I should explain first of all that the book was supposed to come out last August, as in August 20, but was put back by delayed by COVID, and then Faber decided that it'd be wise to publish it to coincide with the BFI retrospective that's coming up in October. But he talks at the end of the Peterloo chapter about the trouble he has getting funding, and that he can't make the kind of films he wants to make, which are right. I think for Mr. Turner, he really wanted to go to Venice and film in Venice, and there just wasn't the budget to do that. And I think, if you're a director who goes to the people who have the money and say, I want to make a film, but I'm not going to tell you what it's about because I don't know. There's going to be an element of skepticism there, obviously. But I think also it's a real shame, because part of me would love to see him not with his back against the wall, making films for small, relatively small, ambitious films for relatively small budgets. But I just think it would be amazing to give him a great big wad of money and see what he does with it. And okay, he's not gonna. I mean, probably the closest he's got to an action movie is the scene at the end of Peterloo. But I think it's and there could be an argument, I suppose. Should that kind of old guard, in inverted commas, be giving way to young, diverse filmmakers? And yes, of course, there should be. Youth is always, young people are always making really exciting work. But I think also, they're learning from the previous from the previous generations. And I think, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know where I'm going with this discussion. But I suppose I just think it's very sad that the funding isn't on the table for him to kind of have a last hurrah with being able to make a film that was shot in Europe as well as in a semi-detached house on an estate in England, with people drinking endless cups of tea and hiding their secrets very well.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like there's this broadening of perspective, and you, unfortunately, you require a budget for that, and it's not. It does seem really unfair that that's not forthcoming. And I mean, there is a general sense in the latter part of the book that there's a sort of he feels very bitterly a sort of lack of recognition from things like BAFTA specifically. I mean, sort of like the Oscar nominations, it's like yeah we're never going to win, but that's always very nice. But then BAFTA don't recognize Mr. Turner, and it feels like a poke in the eye.
I mean, I can't really talk about that, honestly. That kind of thing's for him to talk about, not for me. But I do think.
Do you think he's been? Let me rephrase it then in a way that's a bit is a bit more appropriate to you answering it. Do you think he's got his fair due from the various bodies and even the critical community?
I think to a degree, yeah. I mean, I think he's widely seen as one of the best filmmakers and has been for a long time. And I think he might not have chosen to be defined to the extent he is by Abigail's Party. But I think also he recognizes he record. I mean, the Abigail's Party is just bizarre. I think that the way it kind of each successive generation of film fans seems to discover it again and again. But I think people also are discovering Meantime and Gary Oldman and Tim Roth are fantastic in Meantime. And yet again, I'll say the same thing. You've got disillusioned, unemployed youth in Thatcher's Britain that could be in Boris Johnson's Britain now. And I think in that sense, his films are ageless and timeless, remain ageless and timeless. So I think I would say, I mean, how much do you want to be recognized? How important are awards? I don't know. I'm not about to win a BAFTA. I don't know. I mean, I also think awards are only important if you don't win them. And I don't know. I genuinely don't know how important any of that stuff is to him, apart from when he's asked. I know that he's asked about it a lot, and when he responds, that then becomes kind of headline news. It's not something I've talked about. I mean, it's touched on in the book, and he's obviously pissed off at the end of Peterloo. And I didn't actually want that stuff to be in the book because I thought it was too negative, but that's the way he feels, and I respect that. But I think, I don't know. I mean, who is Ridley Scott? I keep on talking about Ridley Scott because I was listening to your Ian Nathan podcast. I started thinking about all Ridley Scott films. Are any of these guys lauded as much as they should be? I don't know. I think they all seem to have a fair amount of respect. There's retrospectives that happen at the BFI. So I don't know, but I do think awards are weird, and I think you can watch this is me talking personally as a writer and a film fan, not as anything to do with Mike Leigh, but you can watch the Emmys and think, what? You can watch the BAFTAs and think, it's just impossible. And the Oscars are absurd most of the time. Or suddenly they'll remember that they're a room. The Oscars will think, we're a room of old white guys. We really should recognize. Oh yeah, Moonlight. I'm quite cynical about awards. I don't think that the people who hand out the awards are probably diverse enough in every respect, in terms of gender, ethnicity, whatever, across the board, for it to really have the value that it's given, that they're given. But that's just my personal thing.
Yeah, I'm with George C. Scott. He called them a meat parade, and he's the only actor who turned down his Oscar because he thought the idea of the Oscar was stupid, rather than for some political or but in all the years of the Oscars, very very few people have turned down one, and he was the only one to say because it's silly.
Yeah, it is silly. It's just silly, and I mean you can see it's silly because of all the what do you see in the papers the next day or online the next day? People's dresses and suits.
Yeah,
what the fuck has that got to do with film?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, talking about in terms of the other sort of an idea that gets lost a bit when we talk about diversity as well is the idea of class. And Mike Leigh seems to be someone who is a director who looks at the entire sort of social spectrum rather than sort of concentrating on the middle class or even necessarily concentrating on the working class. He his films span the whole social spectrum. That's something that I when I started watching him, I sort of felt that was very recognizably British, that sort of notion of class.
Yeah, which is why when I first met him face to face and he argued about his films not fitting into that notion, neatly into that notion of Britishness, I thought it was a bit absurd, which is why we argued. But I think I kind of understand what he's saying in the universal theme thing, but I do think his films are very, very British. I mean, if you were to take High Hopes and stick it in Rome or Milan or Bologna, it's not going to work in the same way. I just can't imagine it working in the same way. And the comment and the class system we have in Britain is very, very pronounced compared to a lot of other, well, I was going to say other European countries. We can't say that anymore, can we? 2 countries in Europe. So I think he is. I don't know. I think for me, when I'm talking about diversity, I do mean class as well.
Sure.
But you're right, it's not often mentioned, or it's not mentioned enough. And I think the things that he doesn't always get the class thing completely right, because I don't think you can get it all completely right, but I don't think he's being voyeuristic. And I think the thing that he also does brilliantly is women in film, and always has done, and has kind of done it right from Bleak Moments, his first feature film, through to Secrets and Lies, and the dynamic between the women in Secrets and Lies, to Vera Drake, to Poppy and Happy Go Lucky. You know, he just does women brilliantly on screen, and that is quite a big compliment for a guy, that, you know, a male filmmaker. I think, I know that people have had historically problems with Naked, and I'm sure there'll be rumblings when it's shown at the retrospective next month, or in October. But I think he's always you know, I mean, in Naked particularly, I guess he's challenging, as I said before, those ideas of masculinity, and I think in other films he's gently challenging women's roles in society, but without bludgeoning people over the head about it. And I think he's not actually celebrated enough for doing that, personally, just because he doesn't kind of run around saying he's a feminist, or wear a t-shirt saying I'm a feminist. You know, he just gets on with it, you know. And I think the very subtle bullying of Keith in Nuts in May to Candice Mawee is, you know, that's a case in point. It's a, you know, he's a really boorish man being mean to his, you know, adoring wife, and that's not just accident, that's design, you know. So I think there needs to be a thesis on Mike Leigh, feminist director.
Yes.
I'm joking, but you know, what do you think? Do you agree? Am I on a...
Well, it's, yeah, no, I do agree. I was just going to say, actually, Naked, I think, was my first Mike Leigh in the cinema. I went to see it at the 051 in Liverpool, a small independent cinema. And I remember the arguments that we had around that film. And it was a film I found very uncomfortable, and yet would defend, but at the same time would listen to arguments from friends who were very, and I think a lot of it, funnily enough, boiled down to the poster, which you bring up in the book as well, that shows a scene which is just before a rape, and yet it's, yeah, which is not necessarily Mike Leigh's decision either. But in terms of a broader, looking at his female characters on a much broader scale throughout his films, yeah, no, absolutely, there's a real empathy there, and there's a real depth. And also, he's someone who's not afraid of portraying women, you know, fucking up and doing bad things, and, you know, it's not an idealistic sort of, you know, it's the director who wears a t-shirt saying I am a feminist, the male director who wears a t-shirt saying I am a feminist, I would imagine would be prey to that kind of fraudulence.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's I think no director is perfect, obviously, and filmmaking is very, very challenging. But I think he's not, you know, Mike Leigh is not afraid to make mistakes, and he's not afraid to look in dark corners. And I think, I don't know, it's a strange one, because I think it would be interesting watching Naked with an audience now, which I haven't done for a very long time, and seeing and kind of feeling that atmosphere, because I think, partly because of the horrendous stories that have been in the news recently, partly because, yeah, I've got a 17-year-old daughter, and her generation is very, very vocal and talk a lot about female safety and male use of pornography, you know, the use of pornography and Pornhub and the Reddit, you know, how available all of that stuff is. And I think, and how that affects men's behavior. And I think that would make, I'd almost need to see Naked again in that environment to be able to talk about it, because it just, the conversation shifted so much since it came out. And it was shocking. I remember seeing it in the cinema and just thinking, fuck, what's this?
Yeah.
And you know, and Thulis is so powerful and so utterly believable that I think, you know, if you come out of the cinema and bumped into him, you'd have been absolutely terrified, almost like it was a horror film in a way. But I think, those stories probably need to be, do need to be told. And do they need to be told by male directors? I don't know. Again, that's probably changed since Naked first came out. I don't know what people would think about that. But I think personally, my point of view would always be that the thought police are everywhere, and anything that allows you to have a conversation about very difficult issues, any piece of culture that allows you or provokes you to have those difficult conversations is important.
Thulis is one of many sort of actors that have sort of come through sort of Mike Leigh's films and reached huge prominence since. And Eddie Marsan, you mentioned Timothy Spall to some extent, although I think he was sort of already quite big in television. And Sally Hawkins, you've got all these actors going. Gary Oldman, Tim Roth, you already mentioned. That I wonder if that's sort of something that you don't really see much anymore. That there used to be these filmmakers who would be proving grounds for young talent in Britain, and nowadays maybe it's not as, maybe just people that find it easier to get off to America straight away anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think it brings us back to class, doesn't it? Because I think Mike gave, without doing it intentionally, he gave a lot of young working class actors their first break. And I don't see that happening anywhere else, really, apart from in TV sometimes. So I think in terms specifically of film, I can't off the top of my head think of anyone else who's doing that, who isn't a writer, director, actor, perhaps. I think, probably, 1,000 people will stick up their hands and say you're completely wrong. But I think it was the whole landscape of filmmaking has changed, hasn't it? It is much harder for young working class actors like, Phil Davis and so on to get those breaks. And I think it's an absurd example because he's gone on to be so successful, not particularly in the world of acting. But James Corden was in All or Nothing, which people forget, and I was just
so he has made some mistakes, then, might be.
I'm not going to comment on that, but I think it's would Sally Hawkins have made it if she wasn't given her first job in All or Nothing? Yeah, I'm sure she would have done, because she's a brilliant actor and a fantastic woman. But I think it might have been a lot harder for those actors to come through. She's not a working class actor at all, but I suppose it's actually quite depressing to think of how hard it is for kids coming through today, and how much money you need behind you to be able to get through drama school, to pay for drama school, to keep going for years while you're trying to get a break, and how easy it is for your Eddie Redmaynes and Cumberbatches and so on.
Well, that's the thing. I was just trying to think of a bunch of young actors, and aside John Boyega, I can hardly think of any who come from anything approximating a working class background. I might be totally wrong, but
well, that's what I'm trying to think as I talk.
Benedict Cumberbatch, Tom Hiddleston, I don't know, maybe Tom Hardy. I don't know what his background is particularly.
No, I don't know. But there's not kind of, like half a dozen names tripping off our tongues, are there?
Yeah, it's not like in the 60s or 50s where you had Albert Finney and you had all those, a generation of kind of working class actors coming, Richard Burton, Richard Harris, Peter O'Toole, all coming out of fairly, working class communities. And
all those gorgeous men, there's still going to be gorgeous young men out there from those communities, and their stories need to be told. We need to be seeing them on telly. And like you were saying, diversity completely includes class. And people forget about that a lot. And I think that's a travesty, really. But I think it's not for us to rectify. Sadly, we can whinge about it a bit. But
the revolution starts here, Amy. You'd be surprised. This is the Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassination right here. You don't. Seems little. Doesn't seem to matter. Seems something far away, but in fact,
we fired a gun.
We're the driver that took the wrong turn. In terms of bringing it back to Mike's last film, Peterloo, which I have a strange relationship with Peterloo. I have to fess up straight away, because I wrote a novel based on Peterloo a few years ago. It's coincidentally, or maybe not even that coincidentally, in terms of it mirrors the structure of Mike's film. Starts at Waterloo, and goes through, and I mean, it's not really that coincidental because it's based on the same historical thing. And so even the fact that Peterloo is called Peterloo after Waterloo, it's a pretty much a sort of no shit Sherlock sort of connection to make, But when I was watching it, I couldn't sort of watch it objectively. I was just watching it going, that's a bit better than what I did. That's not as good. That's a bit better. That's not. But what was your reaction to it? Because I got the feeling when I was reading those last interviews that you were quite ambivalent about the film.
I'm not ambivalent about it. I think, the bottom line is I just wish it had been more commercial, because I think the revolution is not going to start with with middle class educated people watching Peterloo. I really, really wanted it to be, and I don't even know how this is possible. So I'm kind of sounding horribly naive here, and not, this thesis isn't rooted in any kind of realism. But I wanted that the people that the film is about to see the film. That was never going to happen, because I don't know how you make that film. I don't know how you do a call to arms with I don't know how you do that anyway in the world we're living in today. And I don't know how you do it with a limited budget. But I think I'm not ambivalent about it. I think it's a really, really interesting film. And I think I might have preferred it if there'd been a central character whose journey I could follow, like, say, the Maxine Peake character. I'd have maybe preferred to have seen it from one POV, but that's just my laziness as a cinema goer. I thought all the oratory stuff with Roy Kinnear was just brilliant, and I thought I was on set for when they were doing some of the scenes at the end, and it was brilliant to watch. With all the horses being choreographed and stuff, it was fantastic. But I suppose I just wanted it just somehow didn't quite have that mainstream appeal, and that's what I wanted it to have, because I think we need, we learn from history ultimately, and so it's not on the curriculum. People didn't know about Peterloo. Even people who grew up in Manchester didn't know about Peterloo, and it was only really people like Maxine Peake who'd been very passionate about it for a long time, because her grandfather talked to her about it and so on. But I think if those things aren't on a school curriculum, we need films to kind of force that force that subject into the mainstream, and that was my disappointment with it. I think that there was something about it that maybe because of its length, and people will only go and watch a very long film if it's Bond. It just didn't have that streak of commercialism that I would have liked. But then that's not Mike Leigh's filmmaking, so I'm completely contradicting myself essentially, because that was never the film he was going to make.
You wanted Ridley Scott to make it, basically.
No comment. No, I mean, I think in a way only Mike could have made Peterloo.
Right.
But I wanted more bums on seats. I wanted people to be talking about it. I wanted it to be a water cooler conversation. It despite having Amazon's backing, it didn't become that. And my ambivalence, I suppose, is a kind of quiet sigh, or not so quiet sigh, at the kind of global apathy towards learning from history.
I mean, look, for me, it's an absolute, it's an event that I think is kind of key to the development of the Chartists, and then the feminism and the suffragette movement, and even things like The Guardian come out of that.
Yeah. And it should be on school curriculums, it should be taught in school. It should be, don't get me started on Michael Gove. It's just a shame that the way we learn about history in this country is fucked up. And you know, and it's a film that I've seen it 3 or 4 times, and you get more out of it actually each time you watch it, you know, and it's exciting to watch, even though you know the ending's going to be awful. And I've also cried every time I've watched it, I have to say. I just can't bear the end. I just find it too impossible to think that those young lads fought for their country and then were abandoned.
Yeah. Have you got a recommended film book for us, for our listeners?
Oh yes, I do. It is The Definitive Study of Alfred Hitchcock by Francois Truffaut, which is my go-to film book, has been my go-to film book for years and years and years. And no doubt you can see the influence of this in the Mike Leigh and Danny Boyle books, because it is one of the best Q&A, one of the best conversations between 2 filmmakers that exists, I think. And I go back to it often. And it's from another world by now. It's from a completely vanished world, but I love it. And I would recommend it if you like film and you haven't read it. I would honestly recommend it, and you can dip in and out of it at will. It's a completely brilliant book.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amy. That's a brilliant recommendation, and thank you very much for joining me for the conversation.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
So that was my excuse me. So that was my conversation with Amy Raphael. We had to cut it short a little bit towards the end because she had a phone call from Mike Leigh, fittingly enough, that she had to answer. Her recommended book was Truffaut and Hitchcock, which I'm halfway through actually, and is brilliant. I will add my voice, unnecessary though that is, to Amy's recommendation. Hopefully you're all getting a nice big pile of books to work your way through. I've certainly read some really good ones. I'm also into City of Nets, which was recommended by Ian Nathan on our Ridley Scott episode. I hope you're enjoying these podcasts. I don't want to sound needy, but retweeting and liking and all that stuff, and commenting and giving me feedback, even feedback of a mildly constructively critical nature, wouldn't be entirely unwelcome. I much prefer just unambiguous praise, but if there is anything that niggles you, or anything that you think, a guest that we should have, or somebody we should talk to, and I keep saying we, and it's just me. Well, it's me and you, basically. Those are the 2 people who are me, you, and the guests. So 3 at any one time. It's a threesome, a thruple. Okay, a thruple. Okay, I think that's enough. I think you can tell that's enough by now. Thanks very much to Ellie Atkins for the music, and to Ali Howard for helping out with the artwork. And until the next episode, please take care.
Shorter days and chillier nights can make it tough to keep up your fall workout routine. Thankfully, there's Alo Moves, the app that brings health and wellness to the comfort of your home. Alo Moves offers yoga, Pilates, strength workouts, and other fitness classes, plus wellness offerings like meditations, sound baths, and more. Whether you have 5 minutes or an hour, Alo Moves has a class or flow that saves you from a frigid trip to the gym. Get a 30-day free trial and 20% off an annual membership with code ACAST at allomoves.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.